Well, the South African Prisoners Organisation for Human Rights are calling for government to expand. This is the category for prisoners who qualify for the parole dispensation. Earlier on this month, President Cyril Ramaphosa had announced that he was releasing about 19,000 prisoners to curb the spread of COVID-19, this in prisons, and ease overcrowding. Now, the organisation says the current criteria is discriminating against prisoners. But for more on this, I'm joined on the line by the President of the Corrections and Civil Rights Movement. That's Mr. Golden Miles Budu. Mr. Budu, thank you so much for your time and good morning to you. Let's talk about perhaps the concerns that you've raised, that the criteria with which the President might have used to obviously, ease or have some of those prisoners qualifying to receive parole under these COVID-19 pandemic and conditions might be discriminatory. Why do you say so?
Okay, thank you very much for having me, and thank you to your viewers. And I want to make a little correction there. I'm here on behalf of the South African Prisoners Organisation for Human Rights, SAPO. The Corrections and Civil Rights Movement is an organization that was registered as a political party for prisoners. But neither here or there am I saying. I'm moving from a mathematical, biological, and scientific point of view because we had did a little bit of research in terms of the current hot bodies or warm bodies and head counts in the Department of Correctional Services, including sentenced and unsentenced prisoners, female, male, the juvenile, and the elderly. We are told, according to the stats, that there are 162,875 people currently in our prisons. And in order to bring down that total so that the infrastructure that is meant to accommodate anything between 118 to 120,000, you need to add another 24,000 prisoners that needs to be released, including awaiting trialists, to the 19,000 the Department of Correctional Services has proposed. But because when you do that, then you would have enough space and deal with what is called social distancing, and you will in fact have enough funds to let prisoners produce PPEs, hand gloves, and face masks for themselves and correctional officers. But when the announcement was made by the minister told us that the total was 155,000, and if it's 155,000 and they reduce 19,000, the prison still remains overcrowded with 136,000. Then it is 16,000 still overcrowded. So when we say they must double the total, we're talking about figures here, we're talking about human beings, and we're talking about what this disease can do when it gets to a place which is overcrowded and can incubate within minutes if the people remain the way they are.
Now, with that being said, I mean, you also call for the expansion of that category for prisoners who qualify for the parole dispensation. Can you expand on that, please?
Well, look, we do have political prisoners who are still languishing in South African prisons 25 years down the line. It's an indictment to our heart-earned democracy. There are people that were supposed to be being considered 5 years, 3 years, 4 years, 10 years ago that qualified according to the Van Vieren Constitutional Judgment 1 and 2, the Van Wyk Judgment of 2013, and the Opa Patla Judgment, which is the latest. And the Department of Correctional Services, seemingly, they don't have a clue where they must start. And in fact, want to keep on appeasing, I don't know who, to keep their prisons overcrowded. And they simply do not have a properly worked out system to release those that deserve to be released and ease the unconstitutional and overcrowding and overpopulation in our prisons.
Mr. Budu, just lastly before I let you go, I mean, have you engaged with the presidency as well as the president on some of the concerns you've raised? Because I see here, when you talk about the prisoners that have been discriminated, you make mention of them in your statement. I mean, amongst them, you do say there are those prisoners convicted of serious crimes, which include sexual offences, murder, gender-based violence, as well as child abuse, which you say have been excluded. Now, I assume that you're saying you would like them to also have a fair chance at being included in this parole.
Well, these are people that have been in prison for over 10 years, over 15 years, over 19 years. Are you telling me that a person that was arrested, convicted 10 years ago, 20 years, 15 years ago is still a threat? A person that has been arrested 20 years ago and has served 20 years in prison is still a threat to coming out and being a rapist, a child molester, and a robber. And if that is the case, that means that the Department of Correctional Services hasn't done their work in terms of training, educating, giving this person skills, and ultimately rehabilitating this person so that this person come out as a law-abiding, useful, and productive citizen.
And have you engaged with the President on this matter?
Well, we keep on sending them WhatsApps, emails. They don't respond, but technology doesn't lie, and we will tell you and others someday that we have tried our level best to sit down with the President and the Department of Correctional Services. They haven't taken us seriously. We even called for an independent amnesty resolution committee that was going to assess cases of people that must be released and were arrested for Schedule 6 and serious crimes many years ago, so that when a decision is taken, churches were involved, teachers were involved, and civil society were involved, and all of that has fallen on deaf ears.
Well, thank you so much for talking to us, Mr. Golden Miles Budu, joining us there, raising concerns around prisoners who perhaps haven't all benefited from the parole that the President has mentioned that 19,000 of some prisoners will be receiving.